I am Tanaka, the person who recently resigned as president. Since I've been asked to take responsibility for summarizing and speaking on the overview of these past 3.5 years today, I would like to introduce the overall picture briefly. Since time is limited, I will speak at a bit of a brisk pace, so please keep up with me. I will be speaking on the topic, the request for the dissolution order of the Family Federation and religious freedom. Since I am no longer the president, I will allow myself to speak quite freely today. An indispensable figure in the movement toward this dissolution order for the Family Federation is former Prime Minister Kishida. Former Prime Minister Kishida's declaration of severance of ties. This created another massive ripple effect for us. What was the biggest problem with this declaration of severance? It was the act of cutting ties with groups considered socially problematic. In other words, he did not say a single word about what specifically was a problem that necessitated cutting ties. Without pointing out any specific issues, he simply cut ties with groups considered by society to be problematic. Namely, it was society that decided the Family Federation was a problem. He pushed that responsibility onto society and never personally verified the substance of the matter. This is the entrance to a major problem. On top of that, as you all know, he changed the interpretation of the Religious Corporations Act overnight. A total morning order, evening change, sudden reversal, so that a dissolution order could be reached. The Family Federation has not committed a single criminal offense since its founding. Therefore, they use a morning order, evening change to include civil law violations as grounds for a dissolution order. Why is this called a morning order, evening change? It refers to a cabinet decision made on October 14, 2022. They discussed in the cabinet whether the Family Federation deserved dissolution, and they reached the conclusion that it did not. In other words, just as the government had said until then, not a single criminal case had been committed. Therefore, on October 14th, the cabinet decision was that there were no grounds for dissolution. However, on October 17th in the Diet, he spoke about it in the same way as the cabinet decision. Up to that point, I almost want to give him a round of applause. But the very next day, on October 18th, he informed the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology, MEXD, to exercise the right to question against the Family Federation. He told them to look into it. The problem here is that the right to question can only be used when there are grounds worthy of dissolution. Because there are grounds for dissolution, the right to question is used to confirm them further. However, just the day before, he had said there were no grounds for dissolution. Yet the next day, he gave instructions to consider exercising the right to question. He was confronted with this. Isn't that a contradiction? I don't know if he understood this himself, but a clear contradiction had arisen. He was unable to provide a full answer to that. Consequently, he changed the interpretation overnight. In other words, he stated in the Diet that even if it wasn't a criminal case, even if it was a civil matter, it could still warrant dissolution. This is the incident referred to as the morning order, evening change. The logic was that if organizational nature, viciousness, and continuity were present within the civil cases, then it would meet the requirements. There was a huge focus on these three things, wasn't there? Day after day on TV. Organizational nature, viciousness, continuity. Even small children, even dogs and cats. Everyone was about to say it. The internet and newspapers were in a total uproar back then. After this morning order, evening change, a trial for a civil fine began on the grounds that we hadn't 100% fully answered the questions regarding the Family Federation. It went through the district court, the high court, and all the way to the Supreme Court. For the first time on this planet, a democratic nation decided that civil matters could be included in the dissolution of a religion. Japan made this decision for the first time. This was the worst possible decision by the Supreme Court. And because the Supreme Court decided it, when we argued that there was no continuity, viciousness, or organizational nature, well, this was a private server. So you all probably don't know what kind of things MEXD submitted to the court. The decisive part was this. It should be said that it does not matter whether past facts of legal violations exist, whether a tendency toward improvement is recognized afterward, or even whether there is a risk of the worst-case scenario occurring. In other words, the boss, the government, you, the boss, were the one who said continuity, viciousness, and organizational nature were necessary. But then came the blow. They said continuity isn't even needed. Because the average age of the civil cases that became an issue at this time was 32 years ago. Since they brought up 32-year-old civil cases as evidence, they couldn't give an answer if asked about the present, because there are no such cases now. So they declared flatly that whether it exists now or not is not a problem. Even as a layman, this was a shock to me. Well, with that having passed, the dissolution order was decided on March 25th of this year. And immediately, the damage increased. I believe there are many among you who are being victimized, but move toward a great expansion of damage. For example, the Family Federation often prepares flowers for various ceremonies, right? It costs a lot for flowers. We really use them. The headquarters is the same. The flower shop we had always used stopped selling to us. Also, we line up various fruits, don't we? Fruit shops also stopped selling to us. From those kinds of things, various damages spread to both individuals and the organization. So, that is the rough flow of events up to now. What I want to share with you all today is why Prime Minister Kishida pushed this far. I will speak not as a president, but as a private citizen. Now, Prime Minister Kishida was clearly pushed by public opinion. As you all know, at that time, the approval ratings suddenly plummeted. What to do? There's the idea that he moved forward thinking it would be bad to let his ratings drop even further over something like the Family Federation, right? But the question is, how was this public opinion moved? Needless to say, it was the media that moved public opinion. What kind of influence did this media have on public opinion? For example, back then, regarding the request of Family Federation dissolution order, is it better to dissolve it? In phone surveys, 90% said yes. 90% of the Japanese people answered that it would be better to dissolve it. On the internet, it was 66%. For people who do nothing but watch TV at home, it goes this far, 90%. Amidst a series of media reports, we were forced to face the dissolution order. The question is, who was driving the media? It was self-proclaimed journalists, the National Network of Lawyers, against spiritual sales, Zenka Benrin, and former believers. Regarding the National Network of Lawyers, I believe Mr. Fukuda will be able to speak later. This group of people. I just call them a group. Cut that part out. During those TV reports, no matter which channel you turn to, the same people were appearing. Journalists familiar with the Unification Church. Lawyers familiar with the Unification Church. There were only about 4 of them, if you count them on your fingers. The same people appeared on every program, told the same stories, and continued the same talk. This group of people incited and influenced others. Specifically, as will likely be discussed later, they created the flow of abductions, confinement, and forced conversion under the guise of deconversion, leaving the faith. They manufactured victims, brought them to court, and have confronted the Family Federation up to this day. The overall picture of this series of movements actually possesses organizational nature, viciousness, and continuity. If I were the Prime Minister, I would be talking about that. Now, what I want to talk about is what lies ahead. The force behind this series of movements is cultural Marxism, cultural communism, and its background is a certain communist party, the Communist Party of a certain country. If you want to know about cultural Marxism, please order and read Ms. Fukuda's book, The True Identity of Political Correctness, online today. How much this cultural Marxism is rampant and has permeated Japan. What is particularly insidious is that it's most difficult because people don't realize they're being dragged along by it. That is why it's called cultural. Communist ideology has spread culturally. Their weapon is the word human rights. It's used today too, isn't it? Human rights. Their weapons are human rights, diversity, and self-determination. They skillfully utilize these words. They prioritize children's rights over family love. They appeal for same-sex marriage as a form of marriage by using diversity. And then it leads to institutional reforms. They claim that it is a child's right to decide when and with whom they have sex. In every sense, although they themselves cannot realize they are being dragged into such an ideology. Japan is being steadily infested with cultural Marxism. To be more precise, although communism, which has only existed for 110 years, aimed for a simultaneous global revolution, it was unable to achieve it. What was the biggest reason for that? It was a Christianity that was widespread in the European sphere. And the family is what prepares the soil for this Christianity. Therefore, the family and the family structure that nurtures a Christian Bible is seen as the obstacle. Thus, their greatest enemy is Christianity and Christian culture, and to destroy the culture, they have no choice but to break down the family. So, their greatest enemies are Christianity and the family. They drive a wedge into them. Moreover, they learn that even if you change the system, unless the culture changes, a revolution will never happen. So, they believe that even if it takes time, just as fruit eventually falls when it ripens, if you change the culture, the government will eventually fall. This is their strategy. Steadily and surely, within a cultural strategy, they have been eroding us. This way of thinking and ideology has become established in every aspect: academia, education, movies, and internet society. This has been permeating for decades. Pushing this even further from behind is the Communist Party of a certain country. This Communist Party, July 12, 2022. The incident assassination of Abe was on July 8th, wasn't it? That was a Friday. So, after Saturday and Sunday, on Monday, July 11th, I held a press conference. The day after the press conference, July 12th, China was the first to react. The Chinese newspaper Global Times, Huanqiu Shibao, all at once wrote, "The assassination of Mr. Abe demonstrates the correctness of China's elimination of cults." This was the newspaper headline. The article went as far as to say that the assassination of Prime Minister Abe was a success story for the flow of China's efforts to eliminate cults. And on the afternoon of that same day, the National Network of Lawyers Against Spiritual Sales held a press conference. And what did they say at this press conference? Dissolve the Family Federation, even though the perpetrator's motive was not yet known and his purpose was unknown. In that situation, they held a press conference with conclusion of immediate dissolution. China put it in the newspaper in the morning. The next day, the Lawyers Network held the press conference. And this is a July issue when the incident occurred. The July issue of Consumer Law. Hiroshi Yamaguchi of the Lawyers Network said this: "Consultations related to the former Unification Church have decreased. But consultations about damage caused by unknown mini-groups or individual coexistence are increasing, and the Lawyers Network Secretariat is struggling to respond." He clearly wrote here that damage from a former Unification Church has decreased. And immediately after that, the incident occurred. He completely ignored those words and began shouting that damage is still occurring and continuing without change. Well, then on March 25th of this year, the dissolution order was issued. The first place to react was our neighbor, China. It's the China Anti-Cult Association. This is a long message issued by the China Anti-Cult Association, which is under the Chinese Communist Party. This is just a portion of it. Let me read this to you. The decision by the Tokyo District Court applies the same categories used against religion in China, serves China's interests, destroys anti-communist organizations, prepares for a broader crackdown on religion in Japan, and may encourage other countries to take similar action. We are convinced it will serve as a model for other countries in dealing with cult issues, and if anti-cult propaganda is carried out effectively, it will teach other countries that evil forces disguised as religion will lose their hiding places. The dissolution of a Unification Church will cut off its economic lifeline. Economically, we expect this to affect the Unification Church, especially in the United States. The Tokyo District Court made a decision exactly according to the Chinese way of thinking and China's measures against cults. Right now, the one most happy about the Japanese courts and government moving toward the dissolution of the Family Federation is China. And they say it serves a national interest. This is one point we must look at carefully regarding the background. Not only China, but what is surrounding us now is an international network of the anti-cult movement. This international anti-cult network is moving not only in Japan and China, but is creating a huge swell. The measures against cults in the U.S. were at their most intense in the 1970s. A person named Ted Patrick used deprogramming and abductions/confinement to force conversions of those in new religions. As expected, it was deemed excessive, and in the West, this has now become a target of crackdowns. Following this flow, the so-called atheist liberals of France joined hands with the Russian government. On one side, anti-God atheists. On the other, the Russian government which believes in God. They joined hands and created an organization in France called FECRIS. This is an anti-cult organization. It is an anti-cult organization set up with support from both Russian and French authorities. How can people with communist thoughts on one side and people who believe in God on the other join hands? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Cults are an enemy to both, so they join hands. This flow has come flooding into South Korea. The Japanese Lawyers Network also diligently attended European study groups centered around FECRIS in 2002 and 2008 to deepen their learning. And now Japan, Korea, and China have begun to form a terrifying triangle. Standing at the center is, of course, the China Anti-Cult Association, the world's largest anti-cult force. Centering on the Anti-Cult Association, which is a favorite project of the Chinese government. Let me explain a bit. In August of this year, a secret international cult academic exchange program was held in Korea. The participants were staff from the China Anti-Cult Association and, under that name, members of the Chinese Public Security Bureau, what we call Public Security Police, in Japan entered in large numbers. In Korea, they were welcomed by the International Anti-Heresy/Anti-Cult Association, all of whom are Christians. Evangelical Christians in Korea set up this anti-cult association for the Great War against cults. And an invitation was also sent to Japan. The person invited from Japan was Hiroko Nakanishi. She is active alongside Saimai Nishida. I shouldn't just use his name without a title. Saimai Nishida. Hiroko Nakanishi is active with him. Hiroko Nakanishi is the person behind a report in the magazine Shukin Post that claimed Japanese unification church brides sent to rural Korea were driven into a sexual hell. She is someone who sends out completely anti-unification church messaging. These kinds of people held a secret meeting at a university, supported by the Korean government. After this, since October 1st, South Korea has abolished visas for Chinese citizens. It's now an all-you-can-enter for spies. Visas are completely gone. Furthermore, the current Korean president has stripped the prosecution of its power to investigate China. Just the other day, it was decided that investigations against China must not be conducted. And next year, the Korean prosecution service will be abolished. It has been decided it will be abolished in 1 year. Everything has suddenly started leaning toward China. And what is happening is the incarceration of Mother Moon, Hak Ja-han. With China as a starting point, the cult movements of Korea and Japan have suddenly begun to coordinate. I am not a supporter of China, but this is the bright red China. This is the Constitution of China. In the Chinese Constitution, it says, "Citizens of the People's Republic of China enjoy freedom of religious belief." It is at least written in the Chinese Constitution. However, next, but the state protects normal religious activities. Who decides what is normal? Of course, it is the Chinese Communist Party. Next, these are the remarks made by Xi Jinping in September. We must systematically promote the Sinicization of religion and actively guide to adapt to a socialist society. Each religion in our country can only be passed down soundly if it takes root in Chinese soil and integrates with Chinese culture. This was stated on September 29th. Now, China has suddenly begun moving with Sinicization of religion as its primary theme. This is also equivalent to anti-cult measures. This has now begun to form a partnership based in China, Korea, and Japan. Using this cult issue as a base, we have entered an era where Christian churches join hands with the left and communist nations join hands with Central nations without any hesitation. The objective is only one: how to eliminate these cults. This massive groundswell of collaboration is also surging here in Japan. We must understand this clearly as we observe the various events unfolding before us. Do not just look at immediate events. Take a bird's-eye view of the trend as we determine our thinking and our direction. With that in mind, I have shared this with you all today. Thank you very much.